Hello, and welcome to session 2 of the Rhan course, in which we're focusing on emotional well-being, and more specifically on your emotional well-being. I'm Neil Frood, and I'm a clinical psychologist. And in these sessions, I'm drawing on research from the science of positive psychology to talk about different ways in which you can look after your own well-being. The aim is to help you understand your emotions and to suggest practical and effective ways of helping yourself to manage your feelings. In the first session, we measured your happiness level, and I suggested things you could do to increase your happiness. In particular, we discussed ways in which you could stimulate positive emotions to give yourself an uplift and to raise your spirits. I explained that if you understand what you can do to trigger feelings of amusement, pride, contentment, awe, and other positive emotions, this will help you to gain greater control over your moods. This type of knowledge is a key aspect of your emotional intelligence, and it can allow you to stimulate regular uplifts. Identifying powerful sources of uplift can motivate you to plan experiences that you'll find very enjoyable and that you can really look forward to. So I'm encouraging you to become more active in stimulating positive feelings, not just waiting around and hoping for some good things to happen, but arranging for good things to happen. You probably spend some time every day looking after your teeth by brushing them. If it's worth spending 5 or 10 minutes a day looking after your teeth, surely it's worth spending at least that amount of time consciously and deliberately looking after your emotional well-being. But very few people have such a routine. In the first session, we considered ways of managing our feelings. And we noted that we can't directly control our feelings. For example, by simply trying to be happier or trying to stop worrying. But our feelings largely depend on what we do, what we think, and what we pay attention to. And we do have considerable control over what we do, what we think, and what we pay attention to. We then considered how certain activities, such as meeting friends, playing sports, listening to music and so on, can have a real positive impact on how we're feeling, calming us down, for example, or cheering us up. So we can manage our feelings by engaging in particular activities. But our feelings also depend to a large extent on what we think and what we pay attention to. And these are the factors that we'll be focusing on in this session. We're going to start by demonstrating the importance of controlling the focus of your attention. Here's a brief activity that you can do now. It involves simply looking around. When I tell you to start, I'd like you to look around the room or space that you're in at this moment and notice as many straight edges and lines as you can see. I'd like you to spend just 20 seconds recognizing any straight line anywhere within sight. Okay? Start now. Okay, stop. Now, I'd like you to do the same thing again, but this time with a slight difference. I want you to look around the room again for another 20 seconds. But this time, notice as many curved edges as you can, any curved line that you can see anywhere in the room. Okay? Go. and stop. Now, if you think about what you actually saw during these two activities, you may well realise that you had two different experiences, that you saw different things. Some of the curves that you noticed in the second activity, you probably hadn't noticed at all in the first activity. But in the second activity, these curves stood out. Why? Because you were looking for them. Think about that. It's quite important. What we see depends mainly on what we look for. We can explore this a little further with another activity, and I call this the hat trick. In a little while, the screen will be filled with pictures, and many of these will be pictures of hats. I'll leave the display on the screen for about 20 seconds, and I want you to try to remember all of the hats that you can see. And then afterwards, I'll test you to see how well you remembered the hats. Okay? Ready? Now. Okay, and now I'll show you pictures of 6 hats. 3 of these were in the display, so you've seen them before, but 3 were not. Try to identify which 3 hats you've seen before. So pick 3 numbers. So now let's find out how many you got right. Here are the answers. The 3 hats that were in the original picture were number 1, number 3, and number 5. Now, you may have noticed that as well as the pictures of hats, there were also some other pictures in the original display. And these were pictures of insects. In fact, there were the same number of pictures of insects as there were of hats. But would you be able to recognise which insects were shown in the display? Let's find out. Here again are 6 pictures. 3 were in the original display and 3 were not. So which 3 insects do you think you've seen before? Choose 3 numbers. And the answers this time, the insects that were in the original picture were number 1, number 2, and number 3. It's very likely that you were more accurate in identifying the hats than you were in identifying the insects, just because I directed you to focus your attention on the hats. When I do this activity live with groups of people, that's exactly what happens. Most people correctly identify 2 or even 3 of the hats, but they have little idea about which insects were included in the original display. So remember what I said when we completed the straight lines and curved lines activity. What we see depends mainly on what we look for. So what we focus our attention on is very important, and there are a number of things that affect how we focus our attention. First, some things they naturally grab our attention. We can't avoid focusing on certain things. If there's a loud bang, for example, or a flash of light, or if someone shouts our name, then we can't stop ourselves paying attention. And media people are very skilled at grabbing our attention. That's what news headlines do, and social media videos that go viral. And of course, the whole advertising industry involves grabbing our attention with powerful images and messages that is really very difficult to ignore. And then our attention is also affected by other people's instructions or directions. For example, if I say to you, just look at this now, look at that. Well, I bet you did, just because I told you to. Again, it's difficult to resist. And of course, in the hat trick, I told you to look at the hats. And it's a safe bet that none of you actually ignored the hats and looked at the insects instead. But if I'd said, remember the insects, I'll test you afterwards, then everyone would probably have focused on the insects and more or less ignored the hats. So some things just grab our attention. Other things are pointed out to us. And of course, education largely involves directing the student's attention. A teacher will ask you to think about something in particular, or to read what's on the screen, or to look at a passage in a book, or to write an essay on a particular topic. But mostly, our attention is focused by what we ourselves choose to look at, or to listen to, or to think about. So we're free to choose to focus on straight lines or on curved lines, although this is unlikely to be of much interest to us, and our choice probably wouldn't make any difference to our lives. Similarly, choosing to focus on pictures of hats or insects isn't going to make much of a difference, much of an impact on how we feel. But choosing to pay attention to the positive or the negative aspects of things that are really important in our life, now that can make a very significant difference to how we feel. Because, as I've already said, our well-being and happiness depend to a great extent on what we think and what we pay attention to. In reality, almost everything has both good and bad aspects, and it's largely up to us whether we focus more on the positives or on the negatives. If I ask you to identify some things that are good about your life, for example, or about your appearance, or your school, or a particular friend, then I'm sure that you'd be able to list a number of positive qualities for any of those. And if I then asked you to list things that are not so good about your life, your appearance, your school, and so on, I'm pretty sure that you'd then be able to identify some aspects that are less favourable. So we can choose to focus on what's good about or what's bad about. For example, our school, or about ourselves, or about someone in our family, or our body, or one of our friends, or a night out. When we think about any of these, we can deliberately focus on positive aspects or on negative aspects. We can choose to see the glass as half empty or as half full. So do this now. Pick any one of the 6 items on that list. And first of all, try to think of 3 aspects or qualities that aren't so good about the item you've chosen. So be deliberately critical. Focus on negative aspects. Look for 3 negatives. Okay, and now think about the same item, the same person, but this time identify 3 positive qualities, 3 things that are good. Okay, I wonder if you found that activity easy. And was it easier to identify positive aspects or negative aspects? Some people have a general tendency to focus on the positives. They have a positive mindset. They mostly look on the bright side and are generally appreciative and optimistic. However, other people tend to focus more on negative aspects. They pay more attention to flaws and failures, and they are critical and pessimistic. Apart from such differences in people's mindsets, most people are more sensitive to negative information than to positive information. So we naturally tend to focus on bad news rather than on good news. And we often have a stronger reaction to failure than to success. For example, if I tell you that Bethan is loyal to her friends, that she's generally doing well at school, but that she failed one of her GCSEs, and that she has a great singing voice, what's likely to stand out is the single piece of bad news included in that description, that Bethan failed at one of her GCSEs. Similarly, if I told you of 5 things that I like about you and one that I'm not so keen on, that slight negative comment would probably affect you more than the 5 positive comments that I made. And that's because we have this built-in sensitivity to negative feedback. A negative mindset, pessimism, focusing on bad news, and heightened sensitivity to criticism can all cause us a lot of grief and hold us back from doing things that would be pleasurable, exciting, and beneficial. A bias towards negativity distorts our view of things, including our view of ourselves, and such negativity can hurt us a lot. However, fortunately, there are effective strategies that we can use to adjust our mindset so that we come to see things more positively and more realistically. These techniques don't involve us trying to ignore negative aspects or pretending that they don't exist, but they do help us to focus on and to appreciate the positive side of things. There are many benefits of developing a more positive mindset, including definite advantages for our personal well-being and for our relationships. A positive mindset can help us to get on better with other people. It can enhance our level of happiness, boost our confidence, and help us to enjoy life a whole lot more. With so many significant benefits, it's certainly worth making a little effort to develop a positive mindset. So how can we do this? One technique involves recognizing and fully appreciating the things that are good in your life, things that you're grateful for. To begin, take some time to compile a list of things that you're thankful for. And then take a minute or so to focus on and savour each one of these. So, for example, you might feel grateful for the fact that you're healthy, or grateful for having particular friends, and grateful for the love and support of certain members of your family. Focus on each of these advantages that you recognise, appreciating your good fortune and feeling gratitude for having each of these as part of your life. Another strategy that has been shown in lots of research to be a very powerful way of increasing positivity is known as what went well. This is what it involves. At the end of each day, recall 3 good things that happened, things that went well. These may be very simple, such as seeing a friend, having a nice meal, or going for a walk. Such positive events are worth noting, so list the 3 events that you've identified for the day. And then repeat this exercise each evening for at least 2 weeks. This activity will change your mindset, increasing your awareness of positive events as they happen during the day. You'll be actively looking out for positive occurrences, and as a result, you'll notice more of these. The beneficial effects of this simple exercise often last for several months, even if you only do it for an initial 2-week period. And some people continue the activity for several months or even years. When thinking about a positive mindset, we need to recognise the special importance of a positive focus on yourself. Many people don't think about themselves in a positive way, but are instead negative and highly critical of themselves. Some people appear almost embarrassed to recognise what's good about themselves. They seem to confuse appreciating their strengths, talents, achievements and likeable qualities with being arrogant or big-headed. So many people put themselves down by focusing on things that they're not good at and on personal flaws. They seem to constantly focus on shortcomings or failures and ignore any good stuff. This is bad news, because if you're always emphasising negative aspects, you're going to give yourself a really hard time. Creating a distorted image of yourself by emphasising unfavourable aspects and ignoring your positive qualities is bound to undermine your confidence and to lower your self-esteem. Having such a negative mindset is a very effective way of sabotaging your happiness and making yourself miserable. So don't do it. If you recognise that you're one of the people who tends to put yourself down, do yourself a real favour by working to achieve a more balanced and therefore a more realistic and a more positive view of yourself. Achieving such a realistic picture of who you are will increase your confidence, reduce your anxiety level, and help you to be a whole lot happier. So how can you do this? How can you make such a change? Here's a good way of developing a more positive self-image. Write an honest description of yourself from the perspective of a good friend, someone who really appreciates what's good about you. You might want to put yourself in the shoes of a particular close friend who knows you well. Or you might wish to invent an imaginary friend, an ideal friend who understands you, really appreciates your positive qualities, and is 100% on your side. So you would need to set aside some time to work on this activity. And then it would be good to begin by getting into that friend role and starting your writing with a general positive statement. Thus, if your name is Sam, you might start the friend's description of you by writing, "My friend Sam is great. I'm so lucky to have Sam as a friend. There are so many positive things I'd like to say about Sam, including..." And then carry on writing as that friend. Don't try to complete this activity in a single setting, by the way. Work on it in a number of sessions over a few days. Aim at producing a description that fills at least one or maybe 2 sides of A4, and do make sure that you keep what you're writing private. If you take this exercise seriously and work conscientiously to make the description friendly, honest and positive, it can be very powerful. It can bring about a major shift in how you think about yourself. Many people are not positive about themselves. They're highly critical of themselves, sometimes to a point of cruelty. I sometimes think there ought to be a society for the prevention of cruelty to yourself. In fact, many people are their own worst enemy. But the technique that I've just described can help you instead to become your own best friend. Everyone needs to be on their own side and to see the best in themselves. And this is likely to come naturally when you have a positive personal mindset. An important additional aspect of such a mindset involves recognizing not just what you are at present and what you have achieved in the past, but also what you're capable of achieving in the future and of what you can become. Such an appreciation of potential progress and development is often labelled a growth mindset. Now I have two questions for you. First, do you think it would be easier for you to write a novel or to learn to juggle 5 balls? And another question. How long do you think it would take you to learn to speak Japanese fluently? Okay, why have I asked you these questions? I'm not really interested in whether you think you'll find it easier to write a novel or to learn to juggle 5 balls, but I am hoping that you didn't think I could never write a novel or I could never learn to juggle that well, because I'm sure that each of you could write a novel. Every one of you can write and you can tell a story, and those are the 2 elements of writing a novel. Of course, your first efforts at novel writing might not be very successful, to say the least, but every one of you could write a novel, and you could all learn to juggle. You would need a lot of practice, and it might take several months or perhaps even years, but I'm sure that eventually every one of you could learn to juggle 5 balls. And similarly, each one of you could learn to speak Japanese fluently. If you went to live in Japan, for example, and never had any contact with people who spoke English or Welsh, I'm sure that you would learn to speak Japanese, just as every Japanese child does. So your thoughts in response to the questions that I posed about novel writing, learning to juggle, and learning to speak Japanese could provide some indication of whether you have a growth mindset or the opposite, a fixed mindset. If you believe that you could write a novel and could learn to juggle and could speak Japanese fluently, that indicates a growth mindset. It shows that you recognise your capacity to develop new skills. But if you ruled out any of these areas of possible growth, thinking I could never do that, this would suggest that to some extent you have a fixed mindset. We often hear people say things that suggest they have a fixed mindset. Such statements include, I'm useless at maths. I'll never be able to swim. I'm just no good at tennis. I could never give a talk. I'm a born pessimist. I'm just not a tidy person. Each of these statements essentially denies the possibility of future positive change or development. Each of one rules out the potential for growth. A person with a fixed mindset assumes that future positive development is unlikely, and this will have a particularly strong effect on how they react when they fail at something. If they try to do something and it doesn't work, they're likely to think, there, I failed, and I'll probably fail again if I try, so I just won't bother. I'll never be able to do it. I give up. There are several major advantages of having a growth mindset. For example, you'll be able to enjoy doing things even if you're not very good at them, because your enjoyment won't depend on you being successful or doing things right. Mistakes won't make you feel stupid, because you recognise that everyone makes mistakes and that this is often how people learn. You won't feel any pressure to be perfect. Instead, you'll simply appreciate the value of making the effort to do something well. Failure won't make you feel bad, and it won't undermine your confidence. And finally, you'll be motivated to try again. You won't be put off just because something hasn't worked out for you. There are many ways of adjusting your attitude to learning and personal development that will encourage a growth mindset. For example, you can set yourself reasonable challenges and then monitor your progress. And you can experiment with different learning techniques and strategies. These activities will help you to consider your learning more as an enjoyable game. It's also good to look back at your previous successes and to realise that some of these have come about after a series of initial failures and setbacks. This will help you to think of failures as possible steps to success rather than as a dead end. Avoid the idea that every test or exam or marked assignment provides some kind of proof of whether you're clever or stupid, competent or incompetent, and never ever let a disappointing outcome drive you to think of yourself as a loser. Avoid the big mistake of thinking that unless something is perfect, it's not worth very much. Perfectionism is rarely obtainable and it's generally overrated. And don't confuse could be better with not good enough. Recognise that learning fast is not as important as learning well, and that learning well often involves longer-term steady progress with some failures and setbacks along the way. And finally, use the simple trick of switching into a growth perspective by using the short but powerful word yet. For example, I can't play this piano piece very well yet. I don't understand where to put apostrophes yet. I'm not very good at this yet. So if you're ever tempted to give up and say, I just can't do it, replace this with, I can't do it just yet. Adding that tiny word yet can be enough to transform discouraging thinking into hopeful thinking. And that's more encouraging, more realistic, and much more likely to motivate you to have another go, to try again. So now we're coming to the end of this session. I started by emphasising that our well-being and happiness depend to a large extent on the focus of our attention. For example, if we're exposed to a lot of grim news, this can easily lower our mood and bring us down. But we do have a lot of control over what we pay attention to. And we can use this control to achieve a more balanced view of the world and of ourselves and of other people. The first two activities you did, focusing on lines and curves and then focusing on hats rather than on insects, demonstrated that what you see depends on what you look for. We identified a general human tendency to pay more attention to negatives, flaws and failures. And we noted that some people, those who are pessimistic, are particularly likely to focus on the negative aspects of things. Pessimism has a negative impact on well-being, leading to less hope for the future and a reduction in motivation. There are many advantages in having a realistically optimistic view of what's going on. And fortunately, it's possible to learn to become more optimistic. We can actively develop a positive mindset by getting into the habit of deliberately appreciating the positive aspects of a situation, looking on the bright side, so that we correct any bias towards focusing mainly on what's wrong and on what's not so good. Then we considered how people think about themselves, and we noted that many people put themselves down, focusing on things that they think are wrong with them or not good enough, and ignoring many of their positive qualities. That's such a recipe for unhappiness. But again, there are ways of correcting this negative bias so that the person stops being their own worst enemy and becomes their own best friend. That phrase, be your own best friend, is so important and gives such a powerful message for everybody. Finally, we focused on a particular aspect of positive mindset, which is the growth mindset. This emphasizes the potential for positive change and development. It helps us to appreciate that every one of us can develop new skills and increase our knowledge and ability across a very wide range of areas. Every one of us can learn to juggle, to speak Japanese, to write a novel, and to do a million other things. And we shouldn't reduce our options by routinely telling ourselves, I could never do that. In the next and final session in this series, we'll continue our exploration of emotional well-being and happiness by considering what you can do to help yourself if you're feeling under pressure, or if your well-being and happiness are being undermined by anxiety, or because you're feeling down, or maybe because you're feeling extremely angry. The truth is that everybody hurts sometime, and it's important to have effective ways of getting through the tough times. Sometimes this may require help from other people, from friends, from family members, or from health professionals. But there are often useful ways of looking after yourself in difficult times, and it's very useful to know about these. So in the next session, I'll tell you about several different ways of helping yourself and also helping other people to manage the strong emotional reactions that we all experience from time to time. So in the next session, I'll help you to build a kind of emotional first aid kit, and I hope you'll join me for that. Thank you for watching. Diolch yn fawr.